I will not recount every day I spent serving at the court of King Henry VIII. Most days followed a similar pattern of dressing, prayers, feasts and entertainments. I would, however, like to briefly recall my feelings towards each of Henry's queens. The first wife I served as Duchess of Suffolk was Anne Boleyn. I have already mentioned that I had little opinion of her. However, I served her well, and despite my distaste for her, I was left shocked when she was accused of adultery and witchcraft. The second queen I served was Jane Seymour, and we were on good terms. My second son was born in 1537, as was Queen Jane's baby boy. A week after his birth, Prince Edward was baptised at Hampton Court Palace, and after the ceremony, I carried the young prince back to his apartments, followed by a 400-strong entourage. I then joined my husband and the rest of the court in the great hall for a lavish banquet. However, joy soon turned to sorrow when sweet Queen Jane died only 12 days after her son's birth. After Jane's death, the king fell into a melancholy state. His Majesty and I had been exchanging New Year's gifts since 1534. We had known each other a long time, and eventually, during the dark months that followed the Queen's death, the king decided he needed distraction and comfort, which I willingly offered on my husband's request. In the early months of 1538, His Majesty would often visit and mask with me, and would leave in much better humour. However, these visits did not last long, and soon the king's counsellors found him a new wife, a German duchess named Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves' arrival in England was delayed. However, in December 1539, Charles and I led the party that welcomed her to Dover. I returned to court and became one of the 6 great ladies of her household. She was a sweet girl, but was completely unprepared for her role as Queen of England. The child Henry chose to replace her with was even less prepared for the life that awaited her. Catherine Howard was foolish and an outrageous flirt. As her ladies-in-waiting, we did everything we could to guide and help her, but the child was more interested in the constant gifts of furs, fabric and jewels which her husband lavished on her than she was in being queen. However, His Majesty had never been happier, and when charges of adultery were brought against her, the king was devastated. The final wife I served was Katherine Parr. I was one of only 18 people who witnessed their marriage in the chapel at Hampton Court Palace, and we became very close friends. Katherine Parr was kind and clever, and was a secret Protestant, which normally would have made me suspicious of her. However, her admittance to her intimate circle helped finalise thoughts which had been forming in my mind over many years, and soon I was converted. Despite being 60, my husband was still reasonably active and continued to serve King Henry whilst I served Queen Katherine Parr. In April 1544, he embarked on what would be his final military campaign in France. He distinguished himself at the Siege of Boulogne and was invited to formally occupy the town after its surrender. A year later, after the sinking of Henry's warship, the Mary Rose, it was my husband who tried to bring her back to the surface and salvage her cannons and contents, which his Venetians did fairly successfully. However, they were unable to raise the ship herself from her watery grave. Nothing would suggest that my husband would soon be gone forever. However, on the 22nd of August 1545, my sweet lord died quite suddenly, leaving a hole in both mine and the king's hearts. Despite being asked to be buried near Tattershall Castle, King Henry insisted that his loyal and generous friend be interred in St. George's Chapel, Windsor, at royal expense. My dear husband ensured that I regained full control of my lands, and I was granted a dower third of his properties. He left money to pay off his debts and provide for his younger son. He also asked that I remained single and did not marry, for fear of his elder son losing his inheritance, and that the king may extend and continue his accustomed goodness towards his entirely beloved wife, which King Henry did admirably. Before my boys and I were able to overcome our grief at losing such a good father and husband, rumours started circulating that now I was a widow, King Henry was considering making me his 7th wife. I was not surprised by these rumours. I was fairly wealthy. I was only 26. I had given my husband 2 sons and was still young enough to birth more children. The king and I had known each other for many years, and of course there had been the visits and masques during the spring of 1538. However, I found these rumours distasteful, as did the king. We were both mourning Charles, and the king wanted to respect his friend's last wishes. I remained at court, and was known as the Dowager Duchess of Suffolk. At court, the Queen and her ladies continued to study and discuss religious texts. During these studies, we heard of a female preacher in London, one Anne Askew, and invited her to speak with us. Her arguments and strength as a woman who had successfully escaped an abusive marriage inspired us, and we were extremely distressed when we heard of her arrest and torture. We feared she may mention our names, and we too would be arrested for heresy. However, despite her torture on the rack, she refused to renounce her faith or mention any names of ladies she had come into contact with. By the time her interrogators took her to Smithfield to be burnt alive, the poor woman was so broken and weak that she had to be wheeled to the location and sat on a chair before the fire was lit. Both Katherine and I felt helpless and shocked that a gentlewoman could be treated so, and her death forced us to dispose of any books which the king or his counsellors might consider heretical. As expected, the king's men soon came to search our closets, and a warrant was written up for the queen's arrest. However, by begging and falling on her husband's mercy, the warrant was destroyed, but the fear of arrest was ever constant. On the 28th of January 1547, His Majesty King Henry VIII, monarch for over 30 years and close friend to both me and my husband, took his last breath, and his 9-year-old son Edward took his place on the throne of England. King Henry, like his friend, my husband, the Duke of Suffolk, had not only been responsible for my upbringing after my own father's death, but had also treated me with respect and honour. Their friendship had raised me to the position I now held, and to lose both of them so soon after each other was devastating. I felt more alone than I had ever felt before, and was unsure of what my future would hold.